Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bits in between.
And welcome to this episode of 1202, the Human Factors Podcast, with me, your host, Barry Kirby. This episode is going to be a bit different in that we are going to be a bit reflective and look back over 2021 and review basically what the podcast has been up to in the past, 12 months, and also a little bit beyond. This has been an eventful year for the podcast. We've put out 17 episodes, including this one, out of a planned 24. So we've also been awarded certificates, or rather a certificate anyway, where we were highly commended by the CIHF in their annual awards at the Outstanding Communications Award of 2021. We've also seen us high ranking in lists of ergonomics and human factors podcast charts. But it's been a year of change too. We've seriously stepped up our game, or at least I think we have, with bits that you've hopefully noticed, including the new logo, artwork, new audio. That's the intros, the outros, and the bits in between, as well as our website at 1202podcast.com. And even more recently, hopefully if you're watching this today, our YouTube channel. We're trying to make the content more accessible to more people, and hopefully this will keep evolving through 2022. But in the background, we've also been changing things too. So we've been buying better equipment and also improving our processes in the hope of providing higher quality content that's easier to listen to and to watch. Unfortunately, the quality of me is the one constant, so you just have to put up with that anyway. We've also been trying to make the content more relevant and engaging with a mixture of interviews and topics, and we aim to keep on looking at making that better, or at least more interesting ways to engage. So next year we'll be looking at reaching out to different platforms. And if you know of somebody who you think we should be interviewing, or you would like to be interviewed yourself on something that's relevant to us, then drop me a line, give me a shout, and we'd be delighted to have you on board. Finally, we've been developing some merch, including hoodies and t-shirts, and you've heard me go on about this in the past few episodes. We think we found a way of selling them now, so keep your eyes on our social media outlets or the website, and you'll be able to buy with your heart's content. Speaking of which, one of the things that I put out there was what to call our new mascot, the dragon, who you can hopefully see, wrong shoulder, that shoulder over there. Not so useful to those of you just listening, but if you're watching on YouTube, you can see over my shoulder, we've got the dragon. And we asked what it should be called, and loads of people have contributed and came up with a huge variety of names. We've taken them all on board, and really there's one that came around just seemed to really work, and that was Huff, which is clearly HF. So, or to give them their full title, Huff the Ergonomic Dragon. So you'll be able to, if you want your own Huff, then you should be able to buy him at some point soon. Again, keep your eyes peeled. So on to today's Christmas episode. I hope this is going to set a bit of an annual trend, assuming that we are still podcasting next year, but we've been going for 2 years now, and I can't see why next year will be any different. But to kick things off, I thought we could review all of our work to date. And to be fair, it also makes my statistics a little bit easier. Therefore, we're going to reflect on some of the podcast stats and also choose our top 5 episodes and reflect on why that is the case. I keep on saying we, so I should really introduce today's guest. I've been joined by a great friend and someone who's been on a previous episode, but not on his own yet. So he hasn't had that full pleasure of the getting to know you treatment. Therefore, it's a delight to welcome the Managing Director of Vindico, Joe Polson.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, Joe. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Really nice. I just can't help but think of the slight irony that I'm here on an HF podcast in a wonky chair.
Yes, this is a new way of doing things for us, because Joe is actually sat in the same room as me, and we've never done this with video at the same time in all this way. So who knows, what technical gremlins are going to be thrown up, and no doubt you'll see that from how much editing I have to do. But there is a whole lot of irony that the chair I've given him, which actually is Amanda's chair, doesn't actually work very well, and clearly we need to get another one. But that aside, if you see Joe comically fall off the back of his chair, then clearly that's just added value. I mean, we don't pay these people, so we've got to get the comedy out there somewhere. Joe, obviously you've been on a previous episode, and that was the episode on Think Air with Professor Paul Lewis. And there you told us a bit about your what we're doing around like air quality and things like that. But that isn't the only thing you do. So before we get stuck into your what you think of the actual podcast itself, can you tell us a bit about you? So what is your current role? What is it you actually do for a day job?
Well, I have a brilliant job because I just get to talk about awesome things that the team at Vindico do and produce. So we've got a really skilled team of a brilliant R&D department and a really good team of developers. So generally we're problem solvers that always relies on technology to fix the problems, but a lot of the time can be process as well. And obviously we're learning a bit more about HF as we go. But I sit in a business, we talk about the problems, the processes, the opportunities. We go back, we brainstorm them. Yourself, you've been in some of those yourself and helped us out. Pull it apart, go back with the low hanging fruit, how they can, the more analogies like rubber hitting the road early, everything we can do, that wonderful management consultancy talk and actually have an impact on a business within a quarter. And that's really what we aim to do. As much as we might have 2-year plans, and we go and impact within a quarter, get a good relationship going, show we know what we're talking about, deliver on that. And more often than not, then it does always lead to software development, web app development. It does go down that route, but we really make sure the foundation is right first.
Cool. So before we met, so we've been working together now for about 2 years. You hadn't really heard of the term human factors or anything like that. So I kind of threw you in at the deep end with that to a certain extent. But it kind of, once we got talking and engaging, I think in reality, you have been doing human factors just by other means for actually quite a long time. So what are your thoughts now around human factors and your engaging with it?
Well, I think I need a t-shirt that says we're so HF and we don't know it.
That's a genius one. In fact, let me quickly copyright that and then come to merch near you.
So HF, don't even know it. I can hear the song in my head. But that's absolutely right. I mean, obviously we were all about that consideration, if you like, between technology effect on processes and the person, because the easier something is to use, the more likely they are to use it. And with my commercial head on, the more likely I had to pay for it next year and ongoing. And that kind of efficiency, we kind of called it, productivity, efficiency, resilience. We obviously never add sustainability to that as well, but we didn't realize that there was like an entire stream associated with that. Ergonomics to me was a wonky chair, a funny shaped bendy keyboard.
Yeah.
That's kind of where it stopped. But of course, in talking to yourself, it just made a lot of sense. I could see the similarities. I could see where we stopped and where you continued on.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a graphic you may be able to share and put into this afterwards, where you were actually telling me the difference between the UI and the UX and where projects sit. And that's explained it perfectly to me. And I got it, and I could see the value. Particularly, I could see the value that you would add to our clients more in the commercial sector. Mm-hmm. But equally, I saw the value that we could add in terms of usability, fun, simple onboarding in the for defence and public sector as well.
And that's been a really cool thing of certainly the past 2 years. We've been working on quite a major project that has, I think, really glued them things together quite well. It's certainly been an education for me, learning about, because I've been in the defence sector now for best part of 20 years. So to see how we can apply it more so in that commercial sector and realize, actually there is other stuff out there we can do this too. It isn't just into pointy sharp things. So that's been really cool. The other thing that you've educated me about as well is NFL. And so you both see us both sat here, Uni Cowboys top and in my brand new shiny LA Rams top. And so and you can't tell me the result of the Rams game that was on Monday night, though I know that we won. But it's been one of these things as well that I think it's been a very educational experience knowing you so far. So which is quite cool. So 2021, and obviously we've talked a lot about the past couple of years, but 2021 has been quite an eventful one for you really. Do you want to give us a quick recap or rundown of the highlights of your 2021 year?
Well, I think just to briefly touch on 2020, because obviously that's when the world went a bit odd. But in 2020, we kind of spent the year planting seeds, if you like, and new relationships, new ideas. 2021 has definitely been the year when they've become things. And they've grown arms and legs, and they've gone off on their own. So I think a good example of that would be in rail and transport, where we delivered a simple system to allow safe access off and on depots. That's now grown to full contractor management, going to be used in every station in Wales. We're already talking to 4 other train operators in England. And so that in transport is something we never thought about getting involved in a few years previously. We've had similar growths in sport, where solutions we've created have now gone across the border into England used in sport, starting conversations with larger governing sport bodies as well. and all kind of around the same thing. And it's very HF actually in making it simpler and better. Which we try to keep the talk about it as simple as possible. But in almost everything that we've created in 2020, it's basically 21's been the extension of that. More in-depth conversations, kind of blowing the doors off. Because like when I was talking a wee bit earlier on about how we have that impact within 3 months, well, we're now in a lot of those projects, we're in year 2. So, so it really is a case of the relationships formed, we understand the business, and that learning we can take then to put even more into those first 3 months and new clients we've gained in 2021. And we're seeing that kind of ramp where we were taking 6 to 9 months to have big impact on a company is now happening in 3 to 4 months. But of course, that puts the stress back on resources as well. So we've grown a little bit in the last few years. I think we've
a little bit.
So we've doubled in size in less than 2 years.
I was going to say, just for those people who are listening, we do actually share offices together as well. And the idea was that we moved into this office and there was bags of room all around. And then, I mean, we've grown a little bit, but yeah, you've managed to exponentially grow really, really rapidly. And everyone's busy. It's not like you've just taken on staff just to take on more staff and look busy. Everyone is flat out all of the time. So clearly there is more of that growing to do.
Well, we just did our Christmas. I couldn't believe 25 people sitting around the table at the Christmas do, and there was a few missing. It was
it was
an eye opener that when I never think to myself, it didn't, because the last few years have been blurs. I can quite easily remember the beginning of the last 2 Christmas do's.
Yes.
And but yeah, it's like, whoa, we've got a lot of people now. Who pays them? It's like,
and it's, but I think what you've done has been really, really interesting, because you've really taken advantage of, or maybe taking advantage of is the wrong word, but I think it is the right way of putting it. You've highlighted where people have had issues, particularly around the COVID, and so you've had your products like Swap and things like that have not seek to exploit anything, but realize that people have problems, and we need to look at things in a new way. And you've really come up with some novel and interesting solutions to make that happen. I think that's because you've been able to turn that around so quickly. Do you think that's a major part of the success of what you've been able to do?
It's massive. That stop and pivot, and that oddly at the same time as having a little bit of patience and being able to do that stop and think. So it was one thing reacting to things that people needed to fit this new COVID world and safe working environment. What we actually did was a bit of a stop and think and go, yeah, we can do that quite quickly, but what are all these other things that we've tried to fix for the last decade and couldn't, because they couldn't get enough attention, couldn't get a budget? If we can fix those at the same time, use the COVID world as the catalyst to fix those things and put them in place. In change management, we talk a lot about keeping people in that change native state, because that's when things really happen quick, and we haven't had to do that. The pandemic has forced people to be change native, so how else do we maximize that opportunity? So yes, it is a bit of opportunism, exploitation, however you want to put it, but it's for the good of the business. We're putting things in place that will definitely outlive the needs of the pandemic. But then we went a step further again and go, okay, how do we also prep it for what they might need in the next few years, ignoring the pandemic? And then that's kind of grown to most of the software we're creating become foundation platforms for everything from payroll to job management, contractor management, health and safety, snagging, IT help desk. All these things are getting built into what we're building that, 5 years ago would have been a bespoke from scratch system per business. And it would have been a really tough sell. Is now it fixes this problem right now. It fixes some old problems. But by the way, look at this. This is how everybody else is using it, and you can fix these new ones you might not have yet.
And that's been certainly an eye opener for me, is the way that you engage with every client in very much not trying to say you need this solution, but more of we've got this portfolio of solutions, say, or this is what other people have done. This is how other people are using it. Is this any good to you? And allowed them to basically take you on a journey. Which I find has been a really fascinating way, which I haven't seen before. So that's really quite a clever approach. But for you, it just seems business as usual.
It's kind of the way we've always done it, because we're entirely a relationship business, which sounds a bit odd when you think we're just tech, but it's not. It's always relationships, and we very quickly want to get to understanding their business to sit almost on their side of the table as quickly as possible, not just to discount what we know they don't need, because it's a waste of both of our times, but to actually get to those good bits, and then just, you don't know them that well yet, so you can't tell them what to do. That'd be rude, so it genuinely is about, these are the things I think have got relevant value to you. How would you see it? How would you use it? How would you join those dots together? And it's a good, honest, engaging conversation.
Cool.
And actually, it becomes the beginning of forming a spec.
Yes. And but everybody bought in together.
Yeah.
Which is, it sounds, I don't know, it sounds a really obvious thing to say.
It does. It
but,
seems obvious to us. It's how we've always done the projects, websites before this. It's the same.
And it should be, but it just seems a welcome new way of doing things that it shouldn't be really. But like you say, it makes your USP, I guess, to a greater or lesser extent. You've been working through COVID-19. It's happened. Have you learned anything about yourself about working through COVID, or has it been, have you been happy with the way that you work? Because you've always worked in a sort of like a tech-focused way. But have you learned anything about yourself along the journey?
I think before, if you'd have said to me we were going to recruit this many people in a short period of time, I'd have gone, no chance, that's scary. I've not actually stopped to think about it. We've just done it.
Yeah.
So, and we've got even bigger plans for next year. So I think what I've learned about myself is where I thought there might be a bit of fear and I'm happy to tread water actually doesn't exist at all.
Yeah.
I thought I might be a bit more, if you'd have asked me in advance, I'd have gone, no, I'm quite risk averse with that. We need to be slow and steady. But now I've definitely not that.
Yeah.
Which has actually quite surprised me and frightened the wife a little bit.
And I think probably everybody else around you. Right, we're going to take a quick break, but then we'll be right back and looking at the basic statistics and our own opinions. So I'll be right back after this.
You are listening to 1202, the Human Factors podcast. We wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your support. You can help further by rating us through your podcast provider, sharing us through social media, and telling your friends and colleagues. Let's work together in raising awareness of the value in putting users at the center of what we do.
And welcome back. I'm here with Joe Polson, the Managing Director of Vindico, and we're looking at, well, I was going to say we're looking at 2021. We're not. We're actually looking at all of the episodes that have happened to date. Next year, I'll be a bit more religious about it and actually look at the 2022 episodes. But to start off with, we're going to look at some of the statistics. And to start off with, I was quite blown away by the number of countries that are listening to this podcast. So we're actually listened to in 69 different countries around the world, which some of them are, I guess, quite obvious. The UK isn't number one, but even in places like Azerbaijan, Honduras, Indonesia, Mali, we've got a small but select listening audience. So welcome to you all from around the world. But in terms of the top 10 numbers, at 10 we've got France, we've got Colombia, Sweden, Ireland, Singapore, Germany, Canada, Australia, United States, and obviously, like I said, the United Kingdom. But we can also look around the different spread of where people are listening as well. So, Joe, at a rough guess, what do you think is the top US state that listens to us?
I guess I'd say it's got to be California.
Well, clearly everybody in Facebook and all that we are clearly on the cutting edge of their listening. But there's some of the other interesting ones that are there. So I mean, we've got quite a high listening in Texas, and then Washington, New Jersey, and all them sort of places. So it's really interesting to see that going on. But what surprised me more than anything else was actually in the UK was the top listening counties. And so number one, I sort of expected, either Carmarthenshire, given that we live in Carmarthenshire, or Cumbria, because I'm from Cumbria and we spent a fair bit of time in Cumbria. But Surrey comes out as number one. So there's clearly a lot of things going on in Surrey that are human factors based. Because then number four is Bristol, and then we've got sort of Nottingham, Kent, Oxfordshire, Hampshire, Birmingham, and Gloucestershire. So we've got quite a broad spread. So it'll be interesting to see if next year how that changes. So now that I've got all these in a spreadsheet, because I do like a good spreadsheet, we'll compare this year with next year and see where we get to.
I think you should leaflet drop a county and see what happens.
That could be quite expensive, but fun.
Yeah,
a road trip.
I think so.
I think we could have
need a graphicked up car and just park it somewhere. See what happens on the stats.
Oh yeah, that would be so decent. Oh well, if if we go, surely then that means you just got to go a van.
Yeah.
Or something with a big side and just go on tour. In fact,
free T-shirt when you tweet the van.
If we could get So what's that that film where is it Chef? Do you ever see that? So Chef, they have a basically one of the so they go driving around and
videos.
Yeah. Vine. Whatever happened to Vine?
Was
the
most good ideas get shut down and stopped nowadays.
Yes. But I think we should have a bit of a 1202 road trip around the UK and any excuse for 2 weeks off and just generally going a good drive around. So let's talk about you. We've both selected 5 of our favorite episodes out of all of the 30, what did I say, 38, 39 episodes that have been done so far, although I think one of them is a trailer, so that doesn't really count. And so we're going to go and basically count down. I think there's only one that we've both chosen. We've both chosen each, so that shows that there's a really good difference in why we're choosing stuff. So, what is your number 5?
My number 5 is actually your first one.
Oh,
I think. Do you know what?
That's like the worst one, isn't it?
No, I know it was short, but that was pretty much, apart from being in a room or listening to you talk on the phone, the first time I've been by myself trying to learn something about HF.
Fair
enough. But it was quick, so I actually got to listen, take it in, and there was no engagement needed from me. Literally just listen.
Yeah.
And so I quite enjoyed that, and I think particularly around the case used, and you were explaining why the 1202 error was there.
Yeah.
I think the whole the whole main mission is probably, if you were to pick one project in the history of humans, like pyramids or whatnot, a bit boring, there's no electricity. But if you were to pick one project you'd say would be the coolest project to go and even just be a fly on the wall of, it would be that one. There's nothing else that's come close to it since, in terms of, we had never, we got the timing of it, and you talked about it in the podcast, the Cold War, the money no object, this is what we need to do, don't care how we do it, we get there, and you're not going to get that again.
No, I mean, for somebody to set such a challenge, but for everybody to step up to that challenge as well, I was always blown away by, there's an interview or a quote or something where somebody quite senior, and it might have been the president, I'm not entirely sure, but goes to NASA and he runs into one of the cleaners and says to the cleaner, so what is it you do here? He goes, well, sir, I'm putting a rocket on the moon. And everybody was just bought in around that mission. Everybody knew that they had a part to play and cracked on with it. So when it came out that I wanted to start the podcast and actually do something, and now you're sort of sitting there going, right, what should I call it? And there's already some really good Human Factors podcasts out there, and they've got names like Human Factors Podcast and things like that. And you want to do something a bit different. You want to do create a bit of a brand, but also you can't go too far off piece, otherwise you sound like a complete nutcase. But when I learned more about it, it was actually through I think it was a BBC podcast around the lunar landings, and they came up around this whole episode around the 1202 error, and you're just sitting there going, this is perfect. This is absolutely it. It ticks all my boxes of being quite cool, a little bit geeky, and all about space, which is a particular fetish of mine. Which that leads us quite nicely into what my number 5 was. And I know it's in your list as well, but mine's for different reasons. Well, I think it's different reasons. So mine was when I interviewed Human Factors in NASA. And so that was talking to the HF team on the Orion program. And this is in my top 5 for, I guess, probably more for production reasons as well as the content that we got. So when I spent a fair bit of time just contacting, I've got to be honest, random people. And I've emailed NASA a couple of times saying, look, I run a small podcast here in the UK. Can I talk to some of your people, please? And if you start emailing and tweeting people randomly like that, you don't really get that much of a response. But then I found some contact addresses on the Orion program itself, and the Orion program has always had a fascination for me around the journey to Mars and all that sort of stuff. And there was then one day I got this email through that had the NASA email address in it, and I was like, oh, is this a restraining order? Is this me about to? And it was actually them come back saying, actually, this sounds really interesting. We can put a team together. We can make it happen. And I was literally bouncing around the hallway and shouting like a loon. So I've got this. and it was just a fascinating thing to do, and also to talk to a bunch of people who were the scale of their program, the type of things they're doing, the sort of things that the roles and opportunities that they have. And I was talking to some of them off camera as well, outside of the interview, and some of the things that they would get up to. You're just sitting there going, "That's just amazing. I want to go there tomorrow and make that happen." But to be able to capture that and actually capture it in such a way that we can exploit it, share them stories with other people, because the human factors in the US I think is still very different from the UK. It's on, I guess, everything we do in the States, it's bigger, and it's just a very different concept. So I think we'll be talking more about that in a couple of episodes time. So let's go and hit your number 4. What's your number 4?
So my number 4 is the interview with Grant Hudson, the nuclear option.
Oh yeah.
And it was great. That means obviously, since watching the show Chernobyl, I knew I was going to enjoy listening to this one, and I'm glad you found time to bring it up in there as well. But what I really enjoyed about this one was his story before you started talking really about nuclear.
Right.
I don't know the chap. I'd happily have a beer with him. Fascinating, because he could write a book on how he got to nuclear, let alone the path he took, and everybody. He almost accidentally stumbled into HF, and a little bit the way we did, but clearly with knobs on, and took that route and involved in multiple sectors before he got there. But it was great to see that angle on it, and then bringing together psychology, tech, ergonomics, all that in that bundle. It felt like the most in-depth conversation around HF, just that career path, how he got there. It kind of all made sense, and then to hear his take on the companies work with, how they've taken on HF, and how, let's be honest, how he's almost got to slip some of it under the radar, because he's dealing with people so stringent and stuck in their ways, and it could be engineers, could be whoever, and they're doing things they've always done, and how he's almost had to slip it in there. They actually even don't know it's human factors, and that kind of adoption. And I could relate to that a lot. In terms of how we attack some problem solvers, how we've got to do change, any kind of change management, and I found that very relatable, even though a completely different path to us.
Grant,
careful approach.
Yeah, Grant is somebody that everybody needs to meet. So my first civilian job was with Grant, and I was working alongside him, and it was an education on many levels. But yeah, hopefully we can convince him to come to conferences, or but it's almost a shame actually that it is a shame with the whole COVID situation coming on, because if it hadn't been, then we'd have easily met up before now, all of us together, because yes, he's very knowledgeable, very good at his job. Also likes a drink, which is very much our sort of people.
And I love that he said that the Chernobyl show was 98 to 99% accurate. Chef-wise, it was almost want to watch it again,
Yes.
But again, interesting now when he talks about HF and the HF issues effectively that led to it all. Interesting. I mean, you wouldn't think that from that's from the top. It's from the top. Everybody did what they were supposed to do. Everybody did what they were told to do. Almost.
Yes.
So it wasn't necessarily the kind of end level processes and then in human error at that stage. It was that it made me realize then that HF actually goes further up.
Yes. Yeah, it's that whole pushing it into the hierarchy, and also if you got somebody at in a senior position saying do this, then why wouldn't you do that? It takes a particular type of person to be able to say, and a particularly empowered person, I think, to sort of turn around and say, whoa, hold on a second.
It's the regime as well, obviously, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the whole thing is still a lesson in communication, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, with anything as that is technical, I mean, a nuclear power plant is possibly one of the most technical things. Some would disagree that there's different bits out there. But in terms of impact and output, it is just something else. And to think that it just sits in isolation, you've got culture, you've got people's behavior. It all sits around it, and it just permeates it. You can't get away from it.
Before we go on to your number 4, one last thing. When he decides to make that washing machine, I want to help, because I completely agree. Can we please add microwaves, tumble dryers?
You're about to mention your oven, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm not going to mention.
You're not going to mention
the domain renewal. I had the email for the domain renewal when I was writing my notes for this.
Oh, well, there we go.
I need to do that. But yeah, he needs to hear about my oven invention.
Yes, so keep a watching eye out for a oven invention that we won't talk about because it's going to come and take the world by storm.
It is.
So my number 4 was actually a very recent one. is around the ergonomics conference for next year. So that was an interview with Nora Balfe and David Golightly. And for me, that was really interesting because one thing this podcast has given me a license to do is to randomly contact people and say, I think what you're doing is interesting. I think other people will find it interesting. But actually, it's a crowbar for me to sort of think, I don't know how you do that. Can I find out more by you telling me? And so it's kind of an arrogant approach, but I figure it gives me a license to do so. And to be fair to both Nora and David, they were very, very open and free with the time to be able to turn around, because I put papers into conferences before, but never really known what's going on behind the scenes. So, there's an awful lot of work. You kind of think with these conferences that, you get a couple of papers in, you have a look through, yeah, that's good, that's bad, that's good. Oh, I like that one, that's a bit cool. Maybe give them a bit of a grading and this, that, and the other. And then you put together a program and think, cool, you chuck people in a hotel, make sure the bar's well stocked, and provide a projector. How hard can it be? Turns out very. With all the stuff they've got to think of, and that's even before COVID. Beforehand, you've got to get all these different things in. You've got to make sure that everybody's happy. You play to the right people's egos, all that sort of stuff. And what they're trying to do this year, so this is Nora's first year, but David has helped organise the ones in the past, and they've done things. So the last two of them have been online, so that's had its own challenges, but they've really adapted well to that and make that work. But even previous ones, where there's been not only the conference bits, but there's been the evening entertainment, and that was more of a quiz, just in case people think there was strippers, and things like that. So yeah, it was really interesting to see, what sort of things they've got to balance, because they were having to balance things like, what themes do they want to put on, but actually they couldn't be too rigid in the themes, because if something else came along that was interesting. So yeah, that was quite from a geeky. How do you organize that sort of thing? For me, that was quite cool. So, your number 3.
Well, my number 3 is your number 5. So I've got NASA here. And pretty much the main reason it's in my top 5 is just because it's really cool.
Yeah.
I saw how excited you were with the email. I got equally excited, wondering if they need, a little tech company to help them out, and we'd be there like them.
Yes.
But no, it was really cool. I think, but what I got from it, apart from being in awe of your podcast awesomeness for getting NASA on there, was I'd been by then involved you for a year and a bit. I've met other HF agencies through you. We've been to a few events, we've met them. So I've got a rough idea of the scale of the industry in the UK, the size of the teams. And that was like, hearing about their team there was pretty much like looking in the future.
Right. Yeah.
They are ahead, and they are well ahead. They're clearly better funded. But it shows that there's a need for that. They perform a really, really important function and I can say this because I'm not officially in your sector, that maybe doesn't have the respect it deserves here yet. Maybe isn't taken as seriously as it is yet. It's clearly key because of the resource they're putting into it. And then you hear the size of the teams. 70 odd, I think from memory, was in the team. I can't remember how it was. It was big.
And that was only in their building.
Exactly.
They had yet another one.
Exactly,
it was mad.
That building. And then, most HF practitioners here are one or two people.
Yeah.
And there's a few teams within, BAE and whatnot, but they're not massive, are they? Not on that scale.
No, I mean, the biggest team was, I think it still is, up in Barrow, and I think that's 30 strong now, and that is the largest team in the UK. Then the second one is down at Abbeywood, where I think they've got 15, 20 people. Might have more.
But they're not doing rockets, are they? It's not as cool.
Well, this is something
different types of rockets,
yeah, I mean, this is one of the things I think that the UK needs to step up with. Quite frankly, I know we're doing the stuff in Shetland, and there is stuff going on that I'm desperately trying to get into. Hint, hint. But there is. We need to get into the space. I mean, we do an awful lot of work around satellites and stuff like that, but that's not as cool as it is cool, but it's not as cool as strapping yourself in and pressing go. I want to see a go button from the UK. I think that'd be epic.
It did give me that sense of excitement about where your sector's going.
Yeah, I think
that's what I really liked. It was like that's almost the potential.
Yeah,
and it's not even like an unknown path you've got to plow yourself now. It's there. Even halfway there would be a lot better than now, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it's like we sort of said before, isn't it? The USA tends to do things bigger, and it is a more developed, and their relationship with UX as well is getting much more refined. because they do have things like user experience researchers, UX designers, and things like that, where we generally have a lot of people are kind of a jack of multiple trades. So from my perspective, I do everything from UX design all the way through to human factors integration, project management, all that sort of stuff. Whereas over there, you'll have people who are probably a much more specialist in single subdisciplines, which is just because size.
It's been the same here in our sector. 5 years ago, there wasn't a massive separation unless you were a massive company between back end and front end. And there definitely wasn't user experience that was given to whoever did the social feed.
Yeah,
if they know how to use Twitter, they'll know our user journeys. And that kind of talk. It's only in the last 5 years that's been tightened down more with us, and you're getting that separation, and those requirements are given that respect, and then obviously given that funding and a wee seat at the table
to make that work. And it's clearly going to keep going in there with all the other technologies that are coming along. So that does take me along quite nicely to my number 3, because my number 3 is it was meant to be a discussion around virtual reality, augmented reality, and extended reality in human factors, and that was with Professor Bob Stone. And for anybody who is aware of Bob on LinkedIn in particular, he's not exactly backward in coming forward. If you post anything on VR in whatever sort of flavor, if it isn't good, or he thinks that you're maybe exaggerating slightly or something like that, he will tell you, and he'll tell everybody else. And he's very, very, very forward in that respect. But what I really quite liked is he's got such a depth of experience. He's not somebody who's sitting there and just trying to put himself in front of everybody and to say I'm the best. What he hasn't done in this field just really isn't worth doing. The sort of stuff that we're doing now, he was thinking about years ago, and he can bring out the pictures and stuff of him holding all that sort of stuff. It was such an insight into sort of showing, I guess, how far things have come, particularly in the VR and AR field, of how far things have come, but also how far things haven't come. That the technology is only sort of catching up with people's aspirations, and the sort of stuff we could do in a really clunky way years ago. We're only doing smooth or sort of semi-smoothly now, and we've still got a long way to go to sort of meet Bob's expectations in terms of how this stuff should be in everyday life and things like that. But some of the projects he's done around visualizing historical buildings, visualizing, he's done work on submarines around training using this type of stuff, and he has promised in the future to come back, because we did actually spend a fair bit of time talking about previous projects, because he's worked with a lot of really interesting people and worked on lots of really interesting projects. So he has promised to come back on and talk in more detail around some of this stuff. So I'm quite looking forward to doing that in the new year. So that takes us to number 2. Who's your number 2?
My number 2 is When Podcasts Collide, Working from Home Tips with a traveling ergonomist.
With Kirsty Angler.
Yeah, and I think my number 1 and 2 are really in there because I think I found the most relevant value to them.
Right, yeah.
So obviously your pure HF review on your top 5, whereas I've got to try and make it relevant to me.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And I think that the whole home working thing is obviously something not just that we've had to deal with firsthand, but we've had to help 20, 30, 40 clients help set up as well.
Yeah.
And I think that what I really liked about it is that where we've been solely to start with, we were focusing on technology because that's what the request was. It was, secure connections to work, and if their phone can do this. And then it did expand to looking at the workplace, but not really behavior. That took a while to kick in. And I think that's really what I pulled out from Kirsty, that it was all about that kind of beyond the interaction with the environment, something as simple as adding structure to your day.
Yeah.
Because we've got time for a small anecdotal story, haven't we? I think.
Of course we have. Yes.
Okay, so I was in was it Nicola Millard?
Yeah.
BT Innovations.
BT, yeah.
So this isn't mine, so I'm going to pass this off Nicola. That I think you might have been on the call. Actually,
yes, I was on the call.
Ago, talking about something called the Inverness Project, which was I think around 1997, where they trialled home working up in Inverness because of the proximity to the exchange and the amount of staff members that lived near it. So back then it was ISDN. They had to dig up the gardens. They connected everybody to work from home. And we're talking now, they had teleconferencing, and that's what it was called then. It was the size of a fridge, right? So these people had these massive dot matrix printers going, they had the full setup there to work from home. And I think they planned to do it for a year. I think. So, maybe slightly inaccurate on some of these numbers, but I'm not going to be far off, okay?
Yeah.
And I think the first 3 months, productivity spiked. Everybody really happy. Great, work from home. This is wonderful. And it kind of plateaued over the next 3 to 6 months and then went off a cliff. And the main two reasons for it was struggling with work-life separation and always feeling like you're on call.
Yeah.
And so you end up working more, working longer, always thinking about work. Fatigue was setting in, stress was increasing. And I don't think the project ever went its full period. I think it was stopped early. I've retold that, possibly slightly inaccurately, but
I'm sure it'll be fine.
But it's close enough. But I think it's wonderful that we knew that then.
Yeah.
And so then when we see this happening and working from home and let's be perfectly honest, a lot of really short-sighted, selfish companies going, yeah, this is great. We don't have to pay rent anymore.
Yeah.
We don't have duty of care of anybody anymore. We don't need to pay all the insurances. They can do it all in their house, their phone bill, their electricity, their fault if they trip over the cat. And it was like, well, no, but you have got a duty of care, and even if it is a case of help them with schedule, help them with a separate place to set up, help them with habits to have that separation, that's still massively lacking in a really high percentage of anybody working from home right now.
Yeah, I do think there is a whole lot of scary stuff coming up around.
I think it's tip of the iceberg as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, because I think it's one of the things that Kirsty sort of says as well is in that, and we did that a while ago, sort of just after the start of after the first lockdown, that as a company owner, and you own your own company the same way as I do, we can't go and intrude into people's personal homes. So in the office, we can provide ergonomic chairs, decent desks, and something that is supportive and stuff that I can look at and say, yes, I'm looking after my team. You can't, the desk is a decent size, so they can, if you're like me, put all your rubbish everywhere and have three coffee cups and all that sort of jazz, without knocking everything over. You can't do that in people's homes if they.
Table.
Well, yeah. The number of stories of people like working off ironing boards because somebody said at the beginning they were a great sit stand thing, which on the face of it is a short term thing. Then maybe a couple of weeks or something like that. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Worked at the dining room table for a couple of weeks. That's fine. We've all sort of done it. That's not a drama. But we're now 2 years in, and some people have still got them sort of setups, and you're like, no, you can't do that.
It's interesting you say we can't tell them what to do, but don't you think we need to do more than say anything you need, let us know? Because that's what I find myself doing to start with. Anything you need, let us know.
Yeah.
If they want a table and a chair, ask us. They need a different type of laptop, keyboard, lighting. We've gone as far as lighting. We've got air humidifiers. Anything they need, have. Yeah. But actually, in preparation for this chat tonight, when I was thinking of the things we were doing, it's like, I'm not sure now, because of the length of time that's gone off, that's enough. I think where's the guide that I've given to the staff to say, this is the best practice? We need to put something in place so that every 90 minutes you get up out of that chair and you go for a wee stroll.
Yeah.
Whether it's go put a cup on, whatever, what are we doing to protect the staff now, other than saying, let us know if you need anything? Or here's a chair.
And that's it. And there has been some guides produced. CIHF has produced quite a good guide, but even then we have to get into active management. But there is also the flip side as well of, if I want to make sure that my member staff's got the right chair or the right table, but most modern houses either don't come with an office or come with a small pokey room. They're like, oh, that's an office. And you can't fit a normal sized table chair in that type of thing. So what right do we have to do it? So this has got a long way to run. Yeah. And I think not everybody has the same attitude as yourself. Because
this is where I'm saying you can't control the environment specifically.
Yeah,
you can't say because that table won't fit, that chair won't fit, the ideal table and chair won't fit.
Yes,
but surely we can do it by behavior then.
Yeah, so that there is
by it's particularly then if you are in a small cramped space, you need to get up more, don't you?
No, you do, and I think we have to be more proactive in pushing our employees to do that. Unfortunately, I think there's possibly, let's just say, larger companies out there who, until they're legislatively required to do that, then they possibly won't, and that's where we'll struggle. And it's gonna, I think, touch wood, hopefully it wouldn't happen, but I think it will. We'll get to a point where somebody will have a work accident at home, and that might be RSI, it might be bad posture, bad back, whatever that is, and then we'll get into legislation, and people will be then going, well, why not? Where did that come from?
I think it's happened already, but in an odd way. And I know it might have been France. I picked up on the radio yesterday where a chap had tripped over a cat on his way to work, but in his own house.
Oh.
And he successfully claimed under the work insurance because he was on his way to work in his own house. Now, I know that's not technically home working.
No, but it's
still
sort of...
So where does the duty of care start? Is it when you're on your way to work? You know? But it's been a successful claim. What
are the other thing? So you talk about the on the way to work thing. One of the thing that I think has been really quite interesting is the number of people I've spoken to who said, you've been on a call and they said, oh, sorry, I was a bit late in starting, early call, say at 9 o'clock, 8, 9 o'clock. And they said, I was on my way into work. And I was like, but you're at home. So yeah, but I really value the commute. So I go and have a walk for 30 minutes beforehand. So I go and walk around the block, or I go and, basically I go out and have that.
That could be an important routine. That's that thinking time. That's that, and that potentially gives you that work-life separation bit there,
Yeah.
You can understand that.
I mean, I'm really lucky now that I do have a sort of separation that we sat at the cabin at the end of my garden. And so I do have a short walk, and I'll try and leave all of my work stuff out of the house. I try not to leave it in the house unless it's in a bag. I try not to work in the house anymore, to have that separation. Not everybody's as lucky. And I found when I was working during lockdown 1, because I was in the living room, I was constantly sat there looking over going, oh, I could just finish that bit of work, or I could just do that, and I couldn't switch off from it. It was terrible, which is why then we sort of started moving rooms around and stuff.
The worst part for me is when you go to bed and you can't sleep and you get back up to work. Because you're thinking, I could just go downstairs and do that now.
I could just knock that off. Just knock that out. Oh, that one out. Yeah.
Which is nicely leaking into my number 1, but it's not my turn yet.
Yeah, I was going to say, you just hang fire. The last bit on this, actually,
we could have a whole podcast on this one.
Yeah, no, and
100%. I think I know we're saying wait for legislation this, that, there. I think, but the onus is on us as SMEs to push this out as good habits, good behaviour to staff. No reason why we shouldn't.
Yeah, that's true.
But it can be guided by advice from custody, HF like yourself.
Maybe.
Yeah, you need a guide. You need to put a guide out.
There is a guide out. I'll send it to you.
A better guide.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Because that can't be a good guide if I've not seen it. Put something out that will be seen.
Yeah, I might just not have sent it to you. Anyway, we'll just gloss over that. Maybe we'll edit that out.
Yeah. It's by geared around habits, isn't it? It is like getting up and it is hydration. It is do something before you start work, but doesn't just leave the kitchen. I think that's a good idea. Those things are good.
Well, I mean, what I might try and do, and I might be promising things I can't deliver here, but I'll contact Kirsty and see if we can, all three of us, have a chat about it on a podcast episode and see where, reflect on that. I might be putting her on the spot if she's listened to this, and she might think it's the worst thing ever. But anyway, we'll take a risk.
Well, apologies for only making number 2, Kirsty, but we're still
the other thing to point out about this one is actually whenever I interview somebody who does their own podcast, I always call it When Podcasts Collide. And Kirsty was the first person I engaged with at the time who was doing this that bought this out. And she was very generous with her hints and tips and advice on how to get my podcast to be of better quality. So from then on, everybody else that I interviewed who has a podcast, I put them into this series. So my number 2 was actually the first remote interview I ever did. He was talking about in-service design with CCD, who've now just changed their name. And for the life of me, I now can't remember what their new company name is. That's really bad on my behalf. But that was a really interesting interview, led largely by or spearheaded by Chris Avis, who's works within the CIHF as well. And that taught me an awful lot, if nothing else, about having multiple people doing recordings of what it is you're doing, because they have had a really cool studio setup, and they recorded what we were doing at the same time as what I recorded. And their quality of recording was just so much better than mine. And so when at the end of it, they were like, "Oh, do you want our recording rather than your own?" I was like, "Oh, I'll be fine." Yeah, all right then, go on then. And so they sent me their recording, and then also when I then edit it to put out, I thought I got all the edits done because that was audio only, so I could go in and just slice out all my ums and ahs and everything else. But we'd had a dropout halfway through, and I thought I'd edited that out. And I was like, edit out, cut it, fine, but didn't go back and check. And so that was a huge mistake when they sort of got in touch, said, yeah, you put that live, well done, with all the edits not done. I was like, oh. And so that was a really quick learning curve for me about how to take stuff out and make all that work. But also just the whole topic around in-service design, and that's bringing in a lot of the human factors by almost by other means, but into all the services they were talking about. So things like bits at Heathrow and all that sort of stuff. So that was really quite cool. So now we come to your number one. What was your number one?
My number one, again, because of personal relevance, as well as enjoying the little chef link, was the fatigue risk management. So it was an interview with Sarah Booth.
Oh, yes.
And
okay.
Really, the essence of this was all around sleep. So I've been on my own journey with this in the last 12 months, actually working with a previous guest of yours, Hex Salgado. And I have been, as I've just referred to, that person that gets up and works till 4 o'clock in the morning because he can't get an idea out of his head. It took a fair few months. And Heck preaching the productivity of sleep, the better well-being of sleep, that I'd actually sleep less and have more energy potentially.
Mm-hmm.
It was all over the place. I was going to bed anywhere between 1 and 4 a.m., getting up anywhere between 7 and 8 normally, and then cracking on with work. Never really feeling tired.
Okay.
Which is what I thought at the time.
Yeah.
And interestingly, we kept adjusting my sleep by half an hour at a time over the course of a few months to get to the point where I was down by 10 o'clock, sleep by 10:30, and getting up about 5:30. So I was sleeping longer.
Yeah.
And then what I was finding towards the end of the day, I was getting tired.
Okay.
So I was having more sleep and being more tired. And so I was like, I'm not quite sure this is working, Heck. I checked the instructions and he explained it to me perfectly. He says, he says, you're only noticing you're tired now because you're actually awake in the morning. He says, before you were always tired.
Yeah.
And it was like, because it did feel like this is an unusual sensation. I don't normally feel like this at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And wanting to go to my bed. And he was like, basically, because I was in this state of sleep depravity, could function on it, probably not indefinitely, obviously. We all know the studies and what it takes off your life. So getting it right was the right thing. But so now I can actually listen to my body a bit more. So I know when I need sleep now, whereas before it was that I can power on, I'll work till 5, I'll work through the night, I'll miss the night's sleep. I could do it, no problem.
Yeah.
I felt like no problem, but pretty much I think I was in a bit of a zombie state. And what's happened since is with this new lease of life, I've changed my working week. I now, apart from the last few weeks, because it's been a bit crazy, I work Monday to Thursday now.
Okay.
So I get 4 10-hour shifts in, start earlier in the day. And it's been really, really productive. It's been probably a bit of a shock to the staff because by the time they get in, I've done 2 hours and I'm there with the tasks and the new ideas and everything's kind of flying at them. So they hit the ground running very, very quickly now in the mornings.
Yeah.
So, but it has definitely led to an increase in my own capacity, which is great now because then now I've got that overflow of having to work the last few Fridays, it genuinely is like I'm getting another 1 or 2 days work done in a week, which I can do. But then, so seeing that relevance, that personal relevance, then the journey I've been on, and then listening to there and actually saying, okay, so it's not, I get the fact that it's okay, it's wellness for me, it's productivity personally for me, but actually, yes, that risk is there, from a professional point of view on projects. Didn't really appreciate the risk I was not necessarily given to the clients directly because it's not that extreme.
Yeah.
But definitely in terms of productivity, definitely in terms of efficiency, definitely in terms of potentially missing an opportunity. And I think I feel so much better for it. But then having that, listen to Sarah talk, it kind of almost acted as that ROI almost on it, as that kind of here's that piece of information that says why it's worth it as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just I'm pretty sure it's right. I'm listening to Heck. I'm pretty sure it's right. Oh yeah, all this kind of really makes sense, and I'm actually de-risking not just my life, but the productivity and professional output as well. No,
there's a lot that Sarah went into. I mean, the bits around pilots and stuff, and pilots have to have rest. It's mandated. They have to have so much time in between flights and all that sort of stuff. But that whole piece around, right, how do you force somebody to sleep? Because as soon as somebody says to you, I've been working with Heck as well, and as soon I have this inbuilt thing, as soon as somebody tells me to do something, I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Yeah. That's really. And so as soon as we sort of get into that whole right, you need to go to sleep at 10 o'clock. I'm very much of the, lying in bed going, right, I should be asleep right now. I should be asleep. Why am I not asleep? Why? And you almost wake up more knackered because you've had that sort of stress, or you might wake up early in the morning. And so I did that the other day where I knew I had to be awake by 5 to be hit the road to go and do a presentation in front of actual people. It was quite exciting. But I woke up at 4 and I was like, I've got another hour. I can sleep for another hour. And then I'm lying there going 45 minutes, 30 minutes.
You're just a stubborn bugger as well, Mike. You've got to appreciate that. There is that.
There is a bit of that as well. But you can sort of see how, almost for companies to try and look at that in terms of risk and try and mandate that sort of stuff. The way that she was talking about it was just really insightful. And actually this, that has been one of the most popular episodes as well in terms of people's feedback. And I think that's because, everybody sleeps. Everybody could relate to it.
But sometimes it's about rest, not just sleep as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we work in with this elite sports performance, right where our offices are. Yeah. And they've actually brought in cots now. And it's interesting. They are varying when people, some players like it, some players don't. Mm-hmm. And some players like it at different times. Some want a wee nap in the morning after they've eaten, and they get like 20 minutes in a dark room in a cot. Others benefit, and obviously they've got all the analysis and the strength conditioning people attached to this, so they know it's productive. And some of the players really react well to having a sleep directly after training.
Yeah.
So they've been doing exercises with them, so they're asleep within 5 minutes.
Wow.
And I think there is the breathing exercise. I think it's like tense your toes and tense your ankles and tense your knees, and you up and down relax. There's these things that if you've got the discipline to see through, I think will send you off.
Yeah.
My problem is I get bored and I overthink those things halfway through. I genuinely have to be tired.
Yeah.
So my sleep's being controlled by exercising early in the morning.
Yes.
Because then it genuinely does leave me less energy towards the end of the day. And definitely a huge thing for me is not being eaten after tea time.
Yes, the whole snacking and all that sort of stuff as well. And it sort of dawned on me this afternoon that I'm trying to control my caffeine intake, so I don't actually drink that much caffeine after lunch.
It's like 6-7 hours it lasts, isn't it?
Yeah, which was fine until I asked Leo to make me a cup of coffee this afternoon. He actually normally just make one in the pod machine, but he made me a full-on filter thing, and I drank that. Yeah, and so I'm not sleeping tonight. No, that's really interesting. And like I said, I think Sarah's is the one, certainly from this year, that everybody who I've spoken to said, "Oh, that sleep one, that was, I could relate to that." People from the village, everybody, like people from the village, all the way through to other practitioners.
What I like as well, touching on again, because I come at this from a different angle, is the ones that I've mentioned are all the ones I talk to people about the most as well.
Okay. Promotion. I'm a fan of promotion.
But it's the ones I found easiest to talk about because either personally or through Vindico, that we can relate to entirely through customers, through whatever we're doing. But it hasn't felt like an HF conversation as much as I use it to explain what HF is, because I still have to explain what HF is to 99% of people I meet. Still getting there myself. But those stories have been really good, to the fact that these are factors within,
Yeah.
And then even if they glass over, as soon as I go NASA, they go, really?
And that's kind of it as well. It's the whole bit around, if you try and explain what it is, it's such, we have whole conferences, and I've been to conferences now for the best part of 20 years that are still trying to argue about what the definition of human factors is. And the actual formal definitions are a bit bland, if I'm brutally honest, because they're so, because of what we do is just so all encompassing. It can be anything to anybody almost, because it's fundamentally about people. Anything that we interact with, I've got an excuse to get involved with. And when you put it as simply as that, they're like, well, literally anything.
Like from vague then, isn't it?
It is, it's so vague, because it could be a light switch. And I went for dinner with somebody who said, oh, so it could be just a light switch. Well, where's the ergonomics around a light switch in a sort of really demeaning, I'm making you look stupid type thing? And so then I bored them for about 30 minutes about all the different HF considerations about the light switch, starting from.
Let's not do a podcast on that one, Barry.
Oh, it's really interesting though, because why do you need a light switch in the first place? What exactly? But for me, it's really interesting.
Yeah. But I do like the whole concept of, if someone comes in and asks for a 1/2-inch drill bit, they don't want a 1/2-inch drill bit, they want a 1/2-inch hole.
Yes.
And then what do they want the hole for and all that kind of thinking I love.
Yeah. and that's kind of it. That's sort of the stuff that we do, is take that one step back and say, right, why are you interested? We will have a chat in the future about when somebody asked me to do a task analysis on a trench, but that is a future story for when it's actually allowed to be released,
and when you're allowed to blow it up.
Yes. But my number one was sort of on a something going back to the space theme, was actually with Susan Buckle from the UK Space Agency, and this was really interesting because this was my first taste of having an interview around space. And Susan was really interesting because I, again, just randomly emailed the UK Space Agency, because don't we all? And it just happened to be that their media manager knew Susan, who was at that time within the marketing bit of UK Space Agency and worked with Tim Peake and all that sort of stuff. But she was a human factors practitioner and had spent time with ESA, the European Space Agency. And again, in the UK Space Agency, there are not many HF people at all. I think it's like 1 or 2. ESA, for the entirety of Europe, there's about 8. And so going back to what you said about the whole comparison with NASA and stuff, it is just something else. But Susan really dived into not only the practicalities of ergonomics in space and that type of thing, but also gives a bit of an insight into, how cultural behavior and all that sort of fits into it as well. So, and also it was one of the first ones I took on tour. So I actually went to the UK Space Agency offices, and I had to look a bit professional with kit and microphones and all that sort of stuff, and make sure I wired everything up right and all that sort of stuff. And again, she was very gracious and let me just I did mess up a couple of things, and she was like, that's absolutely fine. She'd done more of this stuff than I had. So, it was a great learning experience, but also it was that first taste of, I could talk about space in a human factors realm, and it was absolutely amazing. So there are both of our top 5s, and
the number one's a prize.
Well, I think what we'll try and do is we'll make sure that they're all aware that it's come out. But yeah, we need to get some t-shirts done. What we're going to hopefully try and do, though, let's not try and over promise and under deliver. But when we get all the merch done, then I want some specialist things done. So either a t-shirt or a mug or something saying, I've been interviewed on 1202, the Human Factors Podcast.
And if it's been interviewed by, if we're going to use our initials, just make sure my initial goes first.
Okay, yeah, no, that's not. But then we've got to ask ourselves the question: do the stats for the downloads match up with what our preferences are? And thankfully, they don't. So otherwise, this would be really boring. So look at the total downloaded. So that includes everything that was played, everything that was downloaded across the board. The top 5 looks like this. So at 5 was Deep Dive, which was human factors in diving with Gareth Locke, which is where Gareth was a chap I met a few years ago, and at a human factors conference, and he said, I want to bring out the human factors within deep sea diving. And I was like, well, that's a bit niche. And in my mind, I'm going, you've got no chance. If we can't get it like really well mandated in defense and all that sort of stuff, how are you going to bring that out in that? But I was really glad that I've had to eat my words, because this year he ran his first conference in human factors in diving, and it was fascinating.
It's interesting. That was my number 6. If I had a 6.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
6. I've always a bit of a fascination with deep sea and underwater.
Yeah, diving is one of these things I've always fancied having a go at, just never got round to. And also me in a wetsuit, it's not on anybody's list of things to see. So at number 4, we talked about it quite a lot, was human factors in NASA. But again, that was only number 4. I thought that would have been more downloaded than it was. Number 3 was Just Culture, which was with James Hayton. And really what that was about was the whole culture around in companies and things like that, of people being able to say when something's wrong, people being not being worried about any recriminations or anything like that. And the way that James highlighted how he takes large and small companies through this journey of realizing that they might have a culture that isn't to their benefit, and also, what fundamentally, how do they reap the financial benefit? Because that's what, bottom line for a lot of companies. What does that actually mean? So that was at number 3, and then at number 2, we've talked about this quite a lot: fatigue risk management. With Sarah, and again that was a really good one. But number 1 was users and government digital strategy, which was with Lee Waters, and member of the Senate. So really what we went into there was around how do they do decision making within government, but also Lee at the time was lead for digital, and so really getting to the point of how governments deal with digital, or maybe don't deal with digital. And really one of the, I guess, the highlights of that interview was, I think Lee sort of admits himself, he doesn't know the full ins and outs of all the technology, but in many ways he doesn't care. He just wants the results to be right, which which is really enlightening and infuriating, probably in equal parts. But there is, it was really good to see that sort of attitude, and you sort of see the work that he's done from there on, has led to the growing and developing of, I guess, more digital knowledge within the Welsh government. So
I think he hears from many channels, and probably at the same time, is the potential of things. The potential of AI, potential of machine learning, potential of IoT.
Yes.
And I think he doesn't. He knows enough to know the potential is probably real, and it's a case of, well, okay, how do we get it real? Quick, people.
Yes.
Get to it. Come on, how do we do this? Let's just get it real. And he wants to be that driver for that, which is entirely admirable and the right thing to do for his position.
Yes.
It's whether everybody else can keep up and deliver it.
Well, and
that's great that he's on the front pushing that.
Yes, and it needs a champion, and it needs that continuing champion. And I think it needs it across, Welsh government needs it, UK government as well.
Let's be fair, it's a lesson for other AMs and MPs, isn't it, as well?
Yes, yeah, because it shows that if you're going to try and do things with, I guess, a positive attitude, then things can happen and people will come and talk to you and things like that. But just stamping your foot demanding that it happens, then that's not really going to get you anywhere, because you're not going to bring people on board. So yeah, it was really interesting listening to the way he was trying to engage with people. It'd be quite cool again to have another refresh with him and his team around where he is now. Because that was, so if we did that around sort of May, June time next year, then it'll be interesting to see where he is sort of 12 months on from where he was with that. So there were the top 5 just downloaded. So the complete downloaded from, how long is this podcast going now? This is the 3rd year. So the other thing we looked at, so a lot of them have been a lot out there a lot longer than others. So I tried to do a how many days they've been actually online divided by the number of the number of views or downloads divided by the number of days that they've been up. And that gave me a different top 5, which I was very excited by. And so to sort of run through them, so this is where we had what we call Pushing the Boundaries of Human Factors, which was with Professor Paul Salmon. So the thing about Paul is, firstly, I've interviewed him a couple of times on different platforms, but he comes from the University of the Sunshine Coast. Who doesn't want to be from the University of the Sunshine Coast? It just sounds amazing. But Paul's been doing an awful lot around everything around transport, human factors around transport risk, AI. And it was him that actually introduced me to this idea of artificial general intelligence. So it is more like almost the commander data type approach of, you don't just ask an AI specific thing and get a specific thing out, but the more being able to have a conversation or just a general question, and it be able to bring back from a breadth of information, breadth of data, breadth of knowledge, so stuff that you wouldn't necessarily expect it to. So that was really interesting. And then 4 was public spaces and the aging population. So that was with Professor Charles Musselwhite. A lot of professors on this podcast. We get a lot of professors. It's quite good. But again,
I'm here to dumb it down a little bit now and again,
Yeah, well, that's why I'm in here all the time, just to give it that sense of reality.
I keep it real,
And so, but this was quite good. Again, this was a chap who's at Abbey University, and basically just saw him on Twitter. He just released a book around aging populations and public spaces, and some of the stuff that we're interested in is around IoT in public spaces, in smart towns, and smart communities. I was like, that just sounds fat, because it sounds a really dumb thing to say, but we're going to get old, in these spaces, and why don't we design for them? So knowing that we're going to be the future users of them, and when I just sort of started reading some of the stuff he was doing, I was like, that's just obvious. But number 3 was Conscious Design, which was an interview with Ian Peterman. So that was a chap in the States who's basically bought his own book out around conscious design, about how you bring a broader range of thinking into this. Sort of fits into that ergonomics piece, particularly the climate ergonomic stuff that we've been working on, about thinking of your supply chains, about thinking about how things are going to get built, just not what's going to get built, and things like that. And number 2 was the ergonomics conference with Nora and David that I mentioned earlier. And then finally was actually my most recent podcast, which means it just basically flew off the digital shelf, was CPD in 2021. So CPD is this idea that we do continuing professional development, and Fiona is the co-chair of the board that looks after all of your CPD in the CIHF. So it was really interesting to get her take on the stuff that we need to do, and again, it was that insight piece around what happens behind the scenes. You submit your stuff, and it all. And the stuff that happens in the background. It was quite enlightening just to get that view. So that takes us to the final section of this interview. I've done most of the talking, so I've enjoyed it. So it's what we call the final 3. So, Joe, what is your go-to book or paper or reference? It could be technical, or it could be fiction. What is the book that you keep on going back to time after time after time?
Well, do you want both?
Oh, go on then.
Okay. So for complete hedonistic, enjoyable pleasure, Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman.
Okay.
I first read it as a 15, 16-year-old. Must have read it 20, 30 times since.
Yeah.
It's just my go-to comfort read.
Okay. Cool.
Wonderfully funny and imaginative. You got Terry Pratchett's fantasy brain mixed with the wonderfully satirical dark mind of Neil Gaiman. It's just a brilliant combo.
Yeah.
Just to me, it's a perfect story and book. If anybody doesn't know, it's about the end of the world and the Antichrist being born, but a devil and an angel that have been best friends since whoever lost the flaming sword, they don't want it to happen, so they arrange for a mix-up at the hospital.
Right, okay.
So this little innocent kid has been brought up by an angel for a gardener and a black nun for a nanny, and whilst the Antichrist is brought up in a council estate in Sheffield or somewhere, but it's a wonderful tale and pure escapism.
Cool.
So, but in terms of aligned to, and there'll be no surprise to anybody that knows anything about Vindico and our brand, is a book called Purple Cow by Seth Godin. So he's a wonderful marketing and communication and human being specialist almost. And the Purple Cow book it refers to an experience we've all had where we're out in the countryside with the family and we're driving past a field of cows and somebody goes, cows. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then by the time you've passed the 15th field full of cows, no one says anything. But if you saw a purple cow, you'd still be talking about it today.
Yeah.
So whatever you do, make it remarkable. So by definition, that is just something people will talk about. But put that into what you do, put that into your messaging, put that into your products, put that into the way you treat your staff. Make it remarkable, make it something people would want to talk about. And that's what we've built almost everything on, down to the hashtag and the branding.
Cool. Okay, so if you could go back to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Be nicer to your knees. Yeah, nicer to your knees, and left ankle's a bit gimme now in the cold. Do you know, I know you can never, because obviously if you're in a good place in your path, you wouldn't really want to change it. You don't know what got you here. But really, I would say, don't waste time.
Okay.
Yeah, don't waste time, and don't put off the stuff that you're putting off because it's difficult or hard or awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Don't put that stuff off. Get out of the way quick. Move on. You will entirely be judged on how you deal with adversities, not by the adversities you actually create. It's how you deal with them, So it's how you deal with it, overcome, and that's what people want to see. And I think it probably took me to my early 30s to really learn that.
Yeah.
And it's really the last decade that's been put into force where it's
so I'm not entirely sure I've learned that yet. Yeah. Okay, so final one then. Who would you suggest we interview next?
I've been thinking about this as we've been talking, and who I was going to recommend to start. It's now changed.
Oh,
it is.
Okay.
So I'm going to publicly say that you would have a wonderful guest and a wonderful conversation in the RFU's head of performance, Nigel Redmond.
Okay.
Okay. So we've liaised with Nigel over a few years. Previously in a role he had with the RFU, he then went off to become head of performance for British Swimming. Very successful in the Olympic Games, and he's now back at the RFU. The whole performance you talk about, I think you said, was it CPDs?
Mm-hmm,
So there's a whole IDPs in sport, individual development programs.
Yeah.
And they have a wonderful task ahead of them, not just from the actual player development, which would be I'm sure you would be speaking the same language there in terms of that, but actually in the coaching as well.
Okay.
So I suppose the teaching element, isn't it? And he's got a big task ahead of him, and we're very much hoping to play a part in that ourselves as well. But I do think it'd be a fascinating conversation, and what there is to know about actual elite sport performance, he knows it all.
Cool.
So I think he'd be one of the foremost people, probably globally, to speak to on it.
Awesome. Well, in that case, I'll have to steal your contact details from you, and
I will happily send an introduction.
That'll be brilliant.
As long as I get a T-shirt. Yes,
there's been enough hints. We'll try and get some merch sorted out.
Witnesses now, mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, only if I don't edit that. I don't think my editing skills are good enough. Anyway, so thank you very much for that. So just a reminder to everybody that your CPD is due by the end of the year, and it is getting close to the end of the year, and I still haven't done all mine yet. So we're all in the same boat, but we can get through it. You remember, you just need 5 bits of CPD as a minimum to make that happen. Also, the quick reminder that the Ergonomics Conference deadline is coming up. So for short papers on the 14th of January, I've just about sorted one out. So I'm hoping to get that submitted if we think it's good enough. And I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Joe for your time with us today. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, Joe, and talk about anything that you've talked about today or about anything purple, how would they do that?
Twitter is an easy one. So I think my handle's on the screen. And those that are listening, it's just Vindico Joe. Easy to find online, obviously on LinkedIn, Joe Polson, Vindico, Think Purple, any of those kind of things you can Google. Think Air, quite easy to find.
That's awesome. We'll make sure them details are on the guest section of the 1202 website as well. So just a reminder that if you're listening or watching and you find this content useful or even enjoying it, then please do tell your friends and colleagues, help them find us, and nothing as good as your personal recommendation. Also, really nice if you could leave us a review and maybe even a 5-star rating on your podcast directory of choice. That will go a long way to help others who are interested in human factors and ergonomics to find us in the directories. It only remains for me to say thank you for listening. Have yourself a fantastic Christmas, a new year. Stay safe, and we will see you in 2022.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us on social media such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at 1202 Podcast. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.